Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen here with life coach Cindy Chavez. Today is Wednesday, May the 29th, 2019. It is 4 p.m. in New York. It's 1 p.m. in Los Angeles. It's 9 p.m. in London. It is 6 a.m. in Sydney, Australia. Wherever you are in the world, thank you for joining us for another episode of LOA Today, your daily dose of happy. And I'm happy that it's Neville Day. Happy Neville Day, everybody.
Happy Neville Day. Happy Neville Day.
Wednesdays are always Neville Days around here, and that's why we call it Neville Day. So thank you for joining us for another Neville Day. And we're in the middle of doing some really good Neville. We're talking about a book that doesn't get a lot of attention in Neville circles. I mean, it's a good one, and people, when you mention it, people know it. You know,
right.
But it's not a book that, you know, it isn't the first one that comes to your mind if you know anything about Neville at all. If you know nothing about Neville, none of the books come to mind. But still, you know, as these things go, it's relatively a lower echelon book, shall we say, but it's got some really good stuff in it we've been discovering.
And it's a small book, but it's deceptive in its smallness because it's dense, you know.
Exactly.
It reminds me of, I used to always get a new book whenever I would go to the beach because that's something I really like to do is just lay on the beach with a book, right, and just get under the umbrella and read a book. And usually it's fiction. Mm-hmm. But about, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, one of my instructors when I was in coaching school recommended this book. And I'll tell you the book, it's not a law of attraction book. It's a fantastic book, though. It's called Mastery of Love. And, of course, I was becoming a relationship coach. So she said this was one of the best books that she had ever read. And so I grabbed that book on my way to the beach. And it's a little book. It's not only, you know, small this way, right, but it's thin. And I thought, I took it out on the beach with me. I said, I'll finish this afternoon. But it was one of these books like this Neville book. It's very dense. And I would read 3 pages and I would get up and I would have to walk down the beach and think about what I just read. In fact, I did a lot of walking and I didn't make it very far through that book.
Well, if you're going to walk, you might as well do it on a beautiful beach. I mean, that's the best time to do that, really.
Exactly. But I always, when I pick up a small book, I always remember that because that was one of those experiences that really made an impact. It's like, just because that book is small doesn't mean that you're going to be able to zip through it and absorb it all right away, especially when you get into these kind of topics, right? Spiritual things and, you know, this deep kind of knowledge. Well,
especially Neville things, because early on in the earliest stages when we were doing our first few Neville books together, I'm the one who slowed it down very much of the time because I didn't have my Neville decoder ring yet. I hadn't earned that yet. So I was still trying to understand it. You were trying to translate for me and so forth. So that took us some time. Well, we've gotten through that stage pretty well. I mean, I've gotten to the point now where I'm pretty much up to speed. We got to this book, chapter 3. I think we did, you know, last episode was all about chapter 3. I think we did 2 pages.
Yeah.
That was crazy.
But, you know, it's funny because you talk about when we were first doing those books that you were stopping and that, you know, you were depending on me to translate. But I got so much out of those books because we were slowly and methodically working through it and kind of tearing it apart and, you know, making sense of it instead of, you know, so many times we might read something kind of quickly and we just don't absorb all of it because we're not taking the time to really pick it apart. So I thought that was really valuable for me. I learned a lot.
Oh, I did too. I don't mean to minimize it at all. I'm just saying it literally took a while to go through all that stuff. And so to be back in that mode again is like, oh, that's a bit of a throwback going on here.
Right? Well, we'll do our best. You know, I'm sure that today we can get through chapter 3 and maybe even, you know, start on the next chapter, which would be wonderful. But do you have announcements you want to make first?
I do. Actually, I want to share a story too, but I'll do the announcements first. The announcements, of course, first of all, for those of us who are following the adventure of Alex and me and our crew in terms of putting together this new audio play podcast series that we're putting together called The Grass is Greener. We are now in casting, and we've mentioned it a few times, but if any of our listeners would like to be included in the casting, be considered perhaps for one of the roles that are available, we'd love to have you apply. And don't be put off by the fact that we've literally had hundreds of people apply because it isn't, I mean, we do take into account a person's acting ability. I won't claim that we don't, but it's more about the voice. It's more about how does the voice sound and how closely does the voice come to the character we're trying to match it up to. So, I mean, we've actually had a couple of our listeners submit applications, send in 20-second video feed, which is really cool. And we're really glad they did that. And I couldn't tell you who's going to get the roles yet. I really have no idea. PJ and Alex and I will be all meeting on Saturday to make those decisions in the very first, I should say the second round of filtering. The first round of filtering I already had to go through. And that was basically taking all the people who hadn't given us any kind of demo and throwing them out. But, that was it. Now we're actually listening to the demos and saying, okay, what do these people have? So anyway, if you want to be a part of the casting process, be considered for one of the roles, just send me an email with a 20-second selfie video. Just use your smartphone. Just talk into the phone. You can talk about anything you want. You could talk about why you want to be in the play. It doesn't make any difference what you talk about. We just want to hear how you sound, how you present yourself, so that we can decide whether or not you might fit with one of the character roles. Just send it to me at walt@loatoday.net. I'll get it, and I will include it. And I will acknowledge that I received it so that you'll know that I got it. And then, hey, you never really know. You might become a star. Who knows? So that's announcement number one. Announcement number two, and I actually forgot to do this the last couple of days, but last week we had one of our loyal listeners point out that she was having trouble finding the live stream. So if you're one of the people who's had trouble finding the live stream, I just want to give you a few clues on where you can find it. It's in a lot of different places. So, if you just start digging, you'll find it most likely. Almost every podcast app out there has it in the description. So if you're listening to this on a podcast app right now, which most of you are, 99% of our listeners listen that way, then just look at the description for this particular podcast and you'll see a link in there for how to click through to the live stream page. You'll also find some other links in there, but that's one of the ones that you'll find there. It's a nice, easy way to get there. Also, when we do the live streams, we're now automatically posting at the time that we start onto Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, and also on Facebook in the Law of Attraction Changed My Life group. So 2 places on Facebook, one on our LOA Today page, the other one in the group page. 4 different places that we're posting a notice that includes a link to the live stream. So there's another way to find it. And then third way to find it is just go to the homepage of our website, loatoday.net, and you'll find it there. So lots of different ways to get to the live stream. And we'd love to have you join. It's so much fun when we have people, posting comments and questions and just tuning in and occasionally even jumping onto the Zoom platform with us, which is even more fun. Yes. So by all means, join us on that. And then finally, if you're not yet a subscriber, become a subscriber. It's so easy to do. Easiest way, just go to loatoday.net, and right at the top of the page, it'll show you exactly what you have to do with your particular device to become a subscriber. And then, of course, once you've subscribed and you're listening, subscribe and share, right? So that's the whole messaging thing. Now, the story I wanted to tell about. Listeners who have been listening for a while will know that we've been through a number of different iterations of the podcast, technically speaking. The most recent one being we were having issues when we were live streaming through Zoom to YouTube. And I ended up coming up with an alternative solution, which has been working great. And when I left that particular feature behind at Zoom, my contact, I actually have a contact, I couldn't believe this, but I have a contact in the Zoom customer service department who asked me, why weren't you going to use that feature anymore? And I explained to her, I gave her all the reasons. There were problems with it. It was expensive. And here I had this other solution that worked perfectly that cost me nothing. And I didn't think of anything of it. She took the criticism well. She was very appreciative. And that's the last I heard about it until 2 days ago when she contacted me so excited because Zoom had changed their policy and they were now including the live streaming as part of the basic pro package, which I already have. So we are now live streaming with Zoom again. And not only that, it's actually working. Before we had technical issues. Apparently those technical issues have been ironed out. So wow, how cool is that? Now, how often do you actually say something to somebody? You told me a story actually before the podcast, Cindy, but most of us, how often do we say something to somebody hoping that, hope against hope that somebody in the upper echelon is going to listen, knowing perfectly well that 9 times out of 10, nobody does. And yet they did.
Well, I like the way we were talking before the podcast, and it was the idea, I think I told you the story about we saw a sign in an establishment one time that said, if you leave here, if you have an experience here that you're not completely happy with, and you leave here without telling us, then you deprive us of the opportunity to make it right. And so sometimes when we're someplace and there's something that could use improvement, we will tell someone in the frame of saying, this is just feedback because we see what could be done better. And it's not, in that same spirit of being angry or just venting or complaining or saying, this is awful, but it's just saying, look, we recognize what could be done better and we thought you might want to know.
Right.
And lo and behold, sometimes you get the result. You've been talking forever about a one-button solution. And
I know.
Over the past months, we've been watching it get closer and closer, right?
It's fun too. You're right. It is getting closer and closer. I just by getting this feature back in Zoom as part of the account, it reduced my button clicking down by 2 clicks. So we're getting closer. It's great. I love it.
You're getting there. That's that pivoting, focusing on what you want, not what you don't.
Right.
Want. What do you want? A one-button solution. When do you
That's
want
right.
it? All right. Well, that's
cool.
Good. That's good stuff. Good stuff.
So let's see. We're halfway through chapter 3, and we were kind of discussing before where we were, and we kind of agreed on what paragraph it was, but I'll let you decide where we're going to pick up on that.
Right. And I think that we may have gone a little past this. So the beginning part of this may be review if you're listening back to the podcast, but that's okay. We can always learn something else by going back and covering it again. So absolutely. So what we are talking about, though, is about how our thought processes and what we call prayer, which we have said a lot of what Neville talks about and what I'm familiar with that maybe falls into the category of prayer, could also be a meditative state or even just what we think. Like we know that thoughts become things. So the things that we think about, the energy that we project out from ourselves while we're having a thought process, right, that it can change things. And so Neville is saying, thou shalt decree a thing. He's using a Bible verse here. Thou shalt decree a thing, and it shall be established unto thee. He says it's not a strong will that sends the subjective word on its mission, so much as it is clear thinking and feeling the truth of the state affirmed. When belief and will are in conflict, belief invariably wins. So this is like one of those paragraphs it's 2 sentences that we could talk about for an hour. Yeah,
so I'm sure. And actually, the easiest thing I could say first off is this touches on the title. The title is Prayer, the Art of Believing. And here he is saying right now, belief invariably wins. So, playing right off the title of the book. And
if you've been around, LOA teachings for any length of time, or even just straight up coaching for any length of time, one of the phrases or, terms that you'll hear is limiting beliefs, right? And we all know that we have certain beliefs that may be even subconscious beliefs that we've brought with us from childhood or from past experience. And those beliefs, they will win out if they're in conflict with something that we're desiring. The belief will win out. And that's why it's so important to understand this, because we don't have to have limiting beliefs. Now, I'm not one that thinks that we always have to go digging for them to find out what they are. But when one surfaces, I think it's important to recognize it.
I'm going to play a little devil's advocate here for just a second. And I'm not even sure if it's devil's advocate. I think I actually believe this. But I'm going to propose the idea that all beliefs are limiting beliefs.
Oh, I think that's true. Sure.
And what we're really talking about here isn't just limiting beliefs. We're talking about limiting beliefs that don't serve us, that don't match up with our preferences.
Correct. Yeah.
Because that's really the ones, all beliefs are limiting in one form or another. The question is, are they serving what we need to serve?
Right. And so the other part of this that I like so much is that he says it's not a strong will that sends the subjective word on its mission so much as it is clear thinking and feeling the truth of the state affirmed. So one of the things I tell clients all the time, and I tell myself all the time, is you can't have what you want if you don't know what it is.
This is true.
And so getting clear about what it is important. And then feeling that state. Neville, we use this quote from him all the time, assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled.
Interesting variation here, because I'm not sure which order this was done in, but this one, I have a feeling was probably it came before the wish fulfilled, the truth of the state affirmed.
Yeah, feeling the truth of the state affirmed.
Right.
And, that's interesting, too, just that little phrase about feeling the truth of the state affirmed, because we talk about affirmations, and sometimes people don't like to do affirmations, or they say that affirmations don't work for them because they feel like they're lying.
Yes.
So the affirmation of, looking into the mirror and affirming, I have a trim, slim, healthy body, when what you're seeing is not saying that's you, feel like a lie. Right? That's why I like to sometimes say, I'm in the process of developing.
That's good. Yeah. Well, what we're really trying to do is we're trying to remind ourselves that what we're seeing in the mirror is an illusion.
But we want to feel the truth of it. Right?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Let me qualify that. The shape that we're seeing in the mirror that we don't like, the one that is reflecting back, I'm lying to myself when I'm saying that I'm trim, because that illusion coming back to me is saying I'm not trim. That's the part that's important to remember, that it's an illusion. It seems so real. It seems so real, but it is still an illusion. And it's a hard concept, but the better that we get at understanding and using that concept, the easier it is to start believing, yeah, I really am slim and trim.
Well, and so what we want to do is we want to feel the truth of whatever we're affirming.
Yes.
Right? Because if it feels true, then we start to believe it.
Exactly.
And the belief is what's going to win. So Neville goes on to say, not by might nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts. He says it's not what you want that you attract. And we talked about this in the last podcast.
Right.
It's not what you want that you attract. You attract what you believe to be true. Therefore, get into the spirit of these mental conversations and give them the same degree of reality that you would a telephone conversation.
I love that.
If thou canst believe, all things are possible to him that believes. Now, what I like about this is, and we talked about this last time, is that we're moving into this area now where we're not just talking about wanting something for ourselves, but we're also talking about using our mental powers, the power of prayer, thought, imagination, to help with someone else's life as well.
Mm-hmm.
So when he talks about giving it the same degree of reality that we would a telephone conversation, he was earlier talking about imagining a conversation with a friend where the friend is telling us of the improvement in their condition, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
He says, therefore, I say unto you, what things soever you desire, when you pray, believe that ye receive them, and ye shall have them. The acceptance of the end wills the means, and the wisest reflection could not devise more effective means than those which are willed by the acceptance of the end. Mentally, talk to your friends as though your desires for them were already realized.
Yes.
I've been thinking about this a lot this week because I have a couple people in my life that are struggling with certain things.
Mm-hmm.
And they want to see those things shift, and I want to see those things shift. So we are in agreement on those things. And I think this is a great exercise for that.
Yes.
That is not just praying, to a power, not just asking some greater power to help someone else, but to mentally talk to the someone else and hear them telling you that things have changed for them, that things have gotten better, that things have improved, that they're experiencing improvement.
And that's certainly the right kind of example. I use the word right advisedly, preferred kind of example to give, because it's an example where you wanted a good result for them and they wanted the same good result. That's a really, really important thing that I know I hammer this a lot, but I think it's really important because people tend to want to wander into the territory of, well, can't I help somebody who isn't as receptive? They don't say it that way, but that's what they often mean by it. And you would think, at least I would think, that it would be obvious from the way they phrased that no, that's not possible, because the key word there was help. You can't help someone who isn't already acting. You can't help someone, it would be like saying, helping somebody across the street who's trying to walk back into the house. You're not really helping if they're walking back into the house, but if they're trying to get across the street, then you are helping.
I think about Byron Katie, who I know I mentioned Byron Katie occasionally, and I like her work. But one of the things I think I've heard her say is that there's my business, and there's your business, and there's God's business.
Mm-hmm.
And I need to stick with, I need to pay attention to my own business, right?
Right.
Stay out of your business.
Yep.
And stay out of God's business. But I think that's what is important there. Not only that, but that if if you're wanting a certain thing for yourself, and I'm supporting you in that, I want that for you too.
Right.
You're in agreement.
Yes.
Right? And
that agreement is powerful.
Right. So if it's the other thing where, you know, I'm wanting something for you that you're not caring about or that you're not, you know, supportive of, then I'm meddling in your business, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
now, I'm gonna do a little Neville speculating here, okay?
Okay, let's do it.
Because I'm thinking about what Christians would say about Jesus healing people.
Okay.
All right. Now, Neville, of course, uses the idea of Jesus as basically Jesus is an allegory rather than a person. He's a symbolic story of here's how consciousness works in Neville's view. In Christian circles, Jesus was an actual person who actually healed people. But here's the question I want to raise. Did he actually heal people? When you look at the actual stories that are told biblically, the story is of how Jesus would say to the leper, okay, or not to the leper, to the lame man, get up. Come on, let's go. Just get up, you know? And the inference that the Christian teachers give is that Jesus healed him. But I think what actually happened there is that the guy healed himself. Jesus kind of led him to believe he could heal himself just like that, but he healed himself. And that's
interesting is they were in agreement.
They were in agreement. That's it. That's the point. It was a true cooperative exercise. If he had gone to a lame person who was unwilling to be of that mindset, it wouldn't have worked. And Jesus knew that perfectly well.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Now, of course, Neville would take that and he would turn that into an allegory about consciousness. So we also have to take that with a grain of salt, but still.
Right. Because Neville does not look at the Christian Bible as being historical, but as a psychological drama.
Right.
And he says that over and over. And so that's where we're coming from when we read what he is teaching, because otherwise we're not understanding what he's saying.
Yes, exactly.
Right? So he says, imagination is the beginning of the growth of all forms, and faith is the substance out of which they are formed. By imagination, that which exists in latency or is asleep within a deep consciousness is awakened and given form. The cures attributed to the influence of certain medicines, relics, and places are the effects of imagination and faith. The curative power is not in the spirit that is in them. It is in the spirit in which they are accepted. The letter killeth, but the spirit giveth life. You know, when he says places, I think of like people going to Lourdes, for instance, to get healed.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I mean, I can say this without having to have any kind of evidence because it's just human nature and it's because what we're talking about. Some of those people that will dip themselves into the water will be healed. And some
yes, they will.
And some of them won't, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what Neville's talking about here is that the curative power isn't in the place.
Exactly.
It's in the spirit in which it is accepted.
It's in the consciousness.
The subjective mind is completely controlled by suggestion. So whether the object of your faith be true or false, you'll get the same results. There's nothing unsound in the theory of medicine or in the claims of priesthood for their relics and holy places. The subjective mind of the patient accepts the suggestion of health conditioned on such states, and as soon as these conditions are met, proceeds to realize health. According to your faith be it done unto you, for all things are possible to him that believes. Confident expectation of a state is the most potent means of bringing it about. The confident expectation of a cure does that which no medical treatment can accomplish. And I think we even see that with actual treatments, right? When someone believes that a certain treatment is going to work, it has a better chance of working than if they're convinced that it's just hogwash and isn't going to work.
Yeah, well, that's the basis of the placebo effect. Without that, you wouldn't have a placebo effect.
Right. And we know that there's a lot of studies going on now about the placebo effect. It really is a thing. Even I think it's amazing too. So
I was really pleased. Joel told me recently that he knew about a study that was actually intended to study specifically placebo, and it was a wide-ranging study touching on a whole bunch of other research that had been done. I heard about that. I started getting goose pimply. I thought it was so funny.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I love it, you know, when someone says, well, it's all in your head. I'm saying everything's all in our head.
Yeah, no kidding.
So failure Neville says failure is always due to an antagonistic autosuggestion by the patient, arising from objective doubt of the power of medicine or relic, or from the doubt of the truth of the theory. Many of us, either from too little emotion or too much intellect, both of which are stumbling blocks in the way of prayer,
Boy, is that the truth.
Cannot believe that which our sense deny. To force ourselves to believe will end in greater doubt. To avoid such counter-suggestions, the patient should be unaware objectively of the suggestions which are made to him. Now, we talked about this last week.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that we both were unsure if we believe this is true. In other words, that the patient should be unaware of the suggestions. So this sounds almost like, even in hypnotic suggestion, you're aware. So I'm not sure what he's getting at. He talked about the silent or absent treatment.
I think he was actually talking to the people of his times. And I say that because I really believe that's the reason why he so heavily used Christian literature. Because that was the main dominant thought pattern of the people of his times in America. In the 1930s especially, when he started doing his ministry, I guess we could call it, he was doing so in the midst of the Great Depression. And in the Great Depression, the first place that most people turned to in the midst of all their pain and anguish was to religion, to their church, to their spiritual belief system.
Yeah.
So he was talking directly to that belief system. I think he's doing the same thing here. At the time, it was basically a fervently held truth that the person on whom this placebo effect, as we're calling it, had to be unaware of it. That was just a basic belief system at the time. And I think that's what he was talking within.
Okay, I think so too. And now we know, because of science studies, that it doesn't really matter whether you think it's a placebo or not. It still works. So, okay, so
which just makes it more cool, I think.
I think so too. To avoid such counter-suggestions, the patient should be unaware objectively of the suggestions which are made to him. The most effective method of healing or influencing the behavior of others consists in what is known as the silent or absent treatment. When the subject is unaware objectively of the suggestion given him, there is no possibility of him setting up an antagonistic belief. It's not necessary that the patient know objectively that anything is being done for him. From what is known of the subjective and objective processes of reasoning, it's better that he should not know objectively of that which is being done for him. The more completely the objective mind is kept in ignorance of the suggestion, the better will the subjective mind perform its functions. The subject subconsciously accepts the suggestion and thinks he originates it, proving the truth of Spinoza's dictum that we know not the causes that determine our actions.
Now, I can give you, based on this, I can also give you another reason why he's saying it this way. Because he said it earlier, either from too little emotion or too much intellect, both of which are stumbling blocks in the way of prayer, we can't believe that which our senses deny. Too much intellect. I think that's the other reason why he says this. If the person in the 1930s or 1940s is engaged with this is what we're doing, I can just see so many of them. We would call it the ego today, but the intellect getting in the way, saying, "Oh no, I know that's not rationally true," and he just destroyed the whole effect.
But I think it also, these ideas can be complex because there's so many layers and so many variables of human ideas, right?
No kidding.
It's like when I think of someone who really believes in the power of prayer, I would think it would only help for them to find out, hey, this whole group of people is sending prayers your way. But if someone doesn't believe, then it might not have as much of an effect. I don't know. I think
it does have an effect on the people who are conducting the experiment, though. That happens a lot. People who do like a prayer exercise where they're praying for somebody without the knowledge of that person.
Yes.
It seems more cool that way. It seems like, oh, wow, if we can influence that, and they don't even know about how great is that. This shows just how powerful this is.
Well, I was reading a study, though, and they were talking about this very situation of a group of people praying for someone that had no idea. Mm-hmm. And that they were shown improvement. So whether it's more improvement or better improvement than if they knew, I don't think that matters.
Nah, not really.
So let's see. Neville says the subconscious mind is the universal conductor, which the operator modifies with his thoughts and feelings. visible states are either the vibratory effects of subconscious vibrations within you, or they are vibratory causes of the corresponding vibrations within you. A disciplined man never permits them to be causes unless they awaken in him the desirable states of consciousness. So this is interesting because he's talking about vibratory effects of subconscious vibrations from within us or corresponding vibrations. And, we talk about energy entrains to itself.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why, like you walk into a room and everyone's celebrating and happy and suddenly you're feeling happier, or you walk into a room where there's been an argument and what happened here?
Mm-hmm.
It's because of the corresponding vibration.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He's relaying this to visible states. I mean, what we're seeing in our surrounding and what we're seeing in ourself.
Yeah.
They're either coming from subconscious vibrations within us or a corresponding vibration.
Mm-hmm.
It's corresponding to something. It's corresponding to something outside of us.
He's talking about harmonics, essentially.
Yes. So interesting that he says a disciplined man never permits them to be causes unless they awaken in him the desirable states of consciousness. Now think about this. I know that for me, I don't want to be brought down by someone else's emotion, but it happens,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, I mean, that's a good indicator of our level of discipline.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons why when we're learning how to be what Abraham followers call deliberate creators, what Neville followers call the people who are men of consciousness or people of consciousness.
Yes.
We're trying to learn essentially how to not be influenced by all these external influences. We're trying to learn to maintain our focus on what we want to maintain our focus on. So, I mean, personally, I like to treat those situations where I walk into that room where they just had the argument and just to see how indifferent I can be to it. Not easy to do, but it's practice. It's a good time to practice.
Zen takes practice.
It does.
Yeah.
It does.
Whenever something happens that's hard to take, my son calls it Zen school.
That's a good description, yeah.
Right? So Neville says, with a knowledge of the law of reversibility. Now remember what that is, because we dealt with that in the first chapter.
Right.
Right? So if friction can create heat, then heat can create friction, etc.
Mm-hmm.
With a knowledge of the law of reversibility, the disciplined man transforms his world by imagining and feeling only what is lovely and of a good report. The disciplined man.
Mm-hmm. Just what we're talking about.
The beautiful idea he awakens within himself shall not fail to arouse its affinity in others. That's that corresponding vibration.
That's right.
He knows the Savior of the world is not a man, but the manifestation that would save. The sick man's Savior is health. The hungry man's is food. The thirsty man's Savior is water. He walks in the company of the Savior by assuming the feeling of his wish fulfilled. Wow, that's such a powerful paragraph.
That's interesting, too, because I just made reference to the fact that earlier he used the wish phrase a little bit differently. Now he's using it in the way that we're more familiar with. Yeah. So it's almost like he developed it within this chapter.
It's possible. It's quite possible.
Yeah.
By the law of reversibility, that all transformations of force are reversible, the energy or feeling awakened transforms itself into the state imagined. He never waits 4 months for the harvest. If in 4 months the harvest will awaken in him a state of joy, then inversely the joy of the harvest will now awaken the harvest now.
Mm-hmm.
Now is the acceptable time to give beauty for ashes, joy for mourning, praise for the spirit of heaviness, that they might be called trees of righteousness, the planting of the Lord might be glorified. Now, I just want to say this one thing before we move on, and that is, when he talks here about, because this is so beautiful, but also he knows the Savior of the world is not a man, but the manifestation that would save. The sick man's Savior is health. The hungry man's is food. He's talking about assuming the feeling of his wish fulfilled. When you are hungry, it's hard to assume the feeling of fullness.
Mm-hmm.
When you're thirsty, it's hard to assume the feeling of your thirst already being quenched. But that's what he's talking about, right?
Exactly.
Talking about that. And so this is where the discipline comes in. So don't be too hard on yourself when it's difficult to assume the feeling because
Absolutely, yeah.
it takes lots of practice.
That's the challenge of being alive. I don't think there's any one purpose for humankind. I think there are, as many purposes as there are beings, and multiply by 1,000 after that. But if you want to pick one common purpose, I think one common purpose is to learn how to maintain our thought process in the face of difficult circumstances. I mean, that's tough. It's tough to do, but boy, is it valuable to learn.
Yes. And that's the thing. I think that I just feel like sometimes a broken record talking about it, but it's the recognition that this is going to take work. Like Neville uses the word discipline all the time, and it's really appropriate because a lot of this stuff doesn't come easy. It's in that place where it's a practice in the same way that we talk about meditation being a practice. Pivoting and meditation to me are like the same thing, because it's that place where people say, well, I try to meditate, but my mind wanders, and I keep having to bring myself back, and then my mind wanders, and I have to bring myself back. And it's like, well, you're doing it.
Yes.
That's what it is. It's the same thing with this. It's when we catch ourselves in that space where we're recognizing the lack, we pivot back over and work on assuming the feeling of the wish fulfilled. And then we also do what there is to do in the process, right? That we take the action, hopefully inspired action, that will help that thing come to pass.
Yeah. Not that it needs to, but we need it. We need it because that's part of what it is to be alive. I mean, we don't come here into life in order to sit on the couch all the time.
Yes. And that's the thing, is that I told a client recently in answer to something she had asked me, I said, magic always works through mundane channels. And she sent me an email back saying, I'm still thinking about this. Wow. Right? And so the examples I always use are the same. And that is, assume the feeling of the wish of the new job fulfilled. Go ahead, but send a resume too.
Yes.
And
yes.
Go ahead, assume the feeling of what it would be like to have an amazing partner, but get out into the world and meet some people.
Do both. Why not?
Yeah.
It's not like this is not a masculinity contest to see who's got the biggest balls to actually attract it without having done anything. This is not a contest. This is life. This is about going out and living life.
Well, that's the thing, is that we live on Earth, and that's how things on Earth generally work.
Yeah.
We are subject to the laws of gravity as well as the law of attraction. So, but we can build an airplane.
Why would we come here if we were going to just sit by and be an observer and a couch potato all the time? What would be the point? Yeah. It doesn't make any sense. By the way, Jeffrey made an interesting comment. I wanted to share it. Actually, 2 comments. He says, what I'm hearing him describe what I call empathy, and assuming the feeling is ultimately faith, moving from skepticism into knowing. I thought that was really well said.
I like that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like the idea of knowing, because that's where I try to get to in my own practice, to that place of knowing. Because that's that place of faith where we know it's a done deal, even though we can't see the evidence of it yet.
Yeah.
And moving from skepticism to knowing, that's the journey. That's the place. That's the work. Yep.
So Jeffrey, thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
He also makes another point. He says, use whatever method works for you. Boy, is that the case.
Oh, that's right. And that's why it's so fun to try all these different things.
Yeah.
Not everything is going to work for everyone.
No.
We're all different.
I mean, every process works. Every method works.
For someone.
The question is, which ones work for you? And that's what you got to find out. Yeah.
Well, speaking of methods, chapter 4 is called Controlled Reverie. And this is one of Neville's methods. And let's see what he says about it, because I love learning methods, right?
Oh yeah, they're fun.
He says
it's funny. I got to do a little aside here. It used to be early on when I was still learning law of attraction, still learning how I am always learning law of attraction. I haven't stopped. But as I was learning how to do this more and more, be a deliberate creator more and more, I found processes to be tough. I found them to be frustrating. I found them to be annoying and like, oh God, I have to do these every day. And I don't know if I can deal with all this. That's the way it was at first. But I started doing some of them anyway, very haphazardly, not a lot of consistency. Do one here, do one for 3 days there, all that kind of thing. And then about this time a little bit earlier, last year, I ended up doing the mirror exercises for a bit. And that was the first time I started doing something extensively because it worked. I finally found one that felt good for me, that I resonated with. And that's it. That's the thing right there. I could have stopped. I could have quit, but I kept going. And in so doing, now I've gotten to the point where processes are fun.
If you're wanting if you're wanting to practice a process or anything, actually, I learned this great trick from one of my best friends, Jackie Gates, called habit stacking.
Habit what?
Stacking.
Stacking. Okay.
And it works like this. So I thought of it when you were talking about the mirror exercises, because when I give clients assignment of doing the mirror work, that's an easy one because most everybody brushes their teeth, washes their face with a mirror nearby, right? So I always say, look, you're already in a mirror every day. Mm-hmm. I mean, I haven't had a client yet tell me that they don't brush their teeth every day, right? It's like, yes, I brush my teeth every day. Okay, good. You're already in the mirror while you're there. You already have a habit, a daily habit of brushing your teeth. Here's the habit you stack on top, and you can do your mirror work.
Got it.
If you have a process you'd like to do 3 times a week, is there some other thing you do 3 times a week? And you can connect them together to where you're doing that process at the same time or right before or after. And that way, once they get connected together, then you don't forget it. Because sometimes, for me anyway, that's the place where it's just that I forget it. I don't have the muscle memory yet. It's not in my schedule yet. I'm not used to always doing it yet. And so a few days go by and I think, oh no, I didn't do that thing I was going to do, right? So I've started doing this whenever I want something done a certain amount of times. I find something else in my life that I'm already in the habit of doing that many times a week or whatever, and I just add it there. So, okay. Helpful tip from...
That is a good one. Yeah, I like that.
Jackie.
I mean, you mentioned the idea of stacking, and I like that now that I understand what you're saying, because when I started to do my mirror exercises, the one thing that I do every single day is come into this office where I record the podcast, I do my other work and so forth. So I put up a mirror right next to the door. So the first thing that I see as I come into the office every day is the mirror.
That's really great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because
that worked.
Mirror work works. It does. It works.
Well, also the habit of putting the mirror next to the door worked. That way I was reminded of it every single day. And for a while I wasn't doing it, and now I got reminded, well, you're not doing your mirror work today.
You looked in the mirror and the face looking back at you said, you haven't done your mirror work today.
That's right.
All right. So chapter 4, seeing the title called Controlled Reverie leads me to believe we're going to get a method. So
I think so.
Neville says everyone is amenable to the same psychological laws which govern the ordinary hypnotic subject. He's amenable to control by suggestion. In hypnosis, the objective senses are partly or totally suspended. However, no matter how profoundly the objective senses are locked in hypnosis, the subjective faculties are alert, and the subject recognizes everything that goes on around him. As an aside, as being a coach who uses these kind of tools, I always like to remember that all hypnosis is self-hypnosis, right? It's like, so if you're, someone that thinks that hypnosis is kind of scary, you're not out of control when someone is hypnotizing you. That's a magic show.
Yes, right.
Right? Okay. So the activity and power of the subjective mind are proportionate to the sleep of the objective mind. Suggestions which appear powerless when presented directly to the objective consciousness are highly efficacious when the subject is in a hypnotic state. The hypnotic state is simply being unaware objectively. In hypnotism, the conscious mind is put to sleep and the subconscious powers are exposed as to be directly reached by suggestion. It's easy to see from this, providing you accept the truth of mental suggestions, that anyone not objectively aware of you is in a profound hypnotic state relative to you. Therefore, curse not the king, no, not in thy thought, and curse not the rich in the bedchamber, for a bird of the air shall carry the voice, and that which hath wings shall tell the matter. Ecclesiastes. He says when you sincerely believe as true of another, you will awaken within him. So I'm a little confused on what Neville is saying here. Might be the first time I've been confused about a Neville saying. But he's talking about more than one person. He's not just talking about what you're doing. You know, a lot of his methods are just, here, I want you to do this. But he's talking here of more than one person, right? He says, what you sincerely believe as true of another, you will awaken within him. And what that says to me is that I like to think of that as more of perception than belief. And what I mean by that is, if I think this person over here is a certain way, Neville's saying if I'm sincere about that belief, I'll awaken that thing within that person. Now that might be good if we're talking about healing, and I sincerely believe that this person is healed and I awaken healing within him. But what about if I sincerely believe that this person is just a real jerk? Am I going to awaken that?
Well, we have an entire media industry that tries to do exactly that.
True.
I mean, that's what drama is all about. Drama is about awakening in each of us fear or anger or distrust or frustration or any of the other so-called negative emotions that become the basis for the dramatic action. You know, so, yeah, I think it happens all the time.
Okay, that's a good point. Oh,
yeah.
Really good point.
I think that's actually, it's rather continuous. Again, I think that the key point here to understand is that just because you awaken doesn't mean that you drive. Okay,
yes. So Neville says no one need be entranced in the ordinary manner to be helped. And I totally agree with that. If the subject is consciously unaware of the suggestion, and if the suggestion is given with conviction and confidently accepted by the operator as true, that would be the one offering, right? Then you have the ideal setting for a successful prayer. Represent the subject to yourself mentally as though he had already done that which you desire him to do. Mentally speak to him and congratulate him on having done what you want him to do. Mentally see him in the state you want him to obtain. Within the circle of its action, every word subjectively spoken awakens objectively what it affirms. Incredulity on the part of the subject is no hindrance when you're in control of your reverie.
And there's a nice, easy way I can think of that we've talked about before to illustrate what he's saying here. And that is, we talked about this in terms of the, what do they call it? I can't think what the acronym is. At the base of the skull, that is basically a collector of experiences. And every time you bought a new Toyota, and every time you see a Toyota, it's like, oh my God, there's another Toyota.
Reticular activation.
The RAS, yes, that's it. This is basically a statement of how the RAS works, among other things.
Right.
And in so stating it, what I think he's really driving at here is the idea that as we go through life, we are constantly receiving what scientists would call stimuli. We're being stimulated in many, many different ways, and stuff is being awakened, to use his terminology. It also happens through the thought process, and he's talking about it in terms of a thought and belief process, and it certainly works that way too. But it works in a lot of different ways, and we are constantly being, some would say, assaulted, others would say exposed, but yeah. It's happening all the time, and that I think there are two key things that I take away from that. First, it's a great indicator that we really are all connected. We share the same spiritual, energetic connections, and that is really where I believe it all comes through. I don't think yes, it comes through the ears, it comes through the eyes, and so on and so forth. But I think more often it actually comes through the spiritual connection. That's where when we say it resonates, that's what it feels like. It feels like it at the spiritual level.
Agree.
You know?
Yes.
And that's what that resonance is. That resonance is, somebody just touched on something that is harmonic to this thing that awakened.
And what's interesting to me is that he's talking about the person that is, doing the thinking here, or the praying or the imagining, whatever you want to call it, that it's up to that person. It has to do with that person's confidence, that person's certainty, that person's energy, right? He says bold assertion by you, while you are in a partly subjective state, awakens what you affirm.
Right.
Self-confidence on your part and the thorough belief in the truth of your mental assertion are all that's needed to produce results. Visualize the subject and imagine that you hear his voice. This establishes contact with his subjective mind. Then, imagine that he is telling you what you want to hear. If you want to send him words of health and wealth, then imagine that he is telling you, I have never felt better and I have never had more. And mentally tell him of your joy in witnessing his good fortune. Imagine that you see and hear his joy. A mental conversation with the subjective image of another must be in a manner which does not express the slightest doubt as to the truth of what you hear and say. I think about this. I think about often when a person is praying for someone else, there's a lot of doubt. I hope they get better. I hope. I want them to get better. I sure hope they do. They're very sick or whatever. There's not the confidence that Neville's talking about here, where the conversation that's taking place, the mental conversation, doesn't express the slightest doubt. There's no doubt, right? If you have the least idea that you do not believe what you've imagined you have heard and seen, the subject will not comply, for your subjective mind will transmit only your fixed ideas. Only fixed ideas can awaken their vibratory correlates in those toward whom they are directed. In the controlled reverie, ideas must be suggested with utmost care. If you do not control your imagination in the reverie, your imagination will control you. Whatever you suggest with confidence is law to the subjective mind. It is under obligation to objectify that which you mentally affirm. Not only does the subject execute the state affirmed, but he does it as though the decision had come of himself, of itself, or the idea had originated by him. Control of the subconscious is dominion over all. Each state obeys one mind's control. Control of the subconscious is accomplished through control of your beliefs, which in turn is the all-potent factor in the visible states. Imagination and faith are the secrets of creation.
This is an interesting chapter, and I'm going to go to a theme that I've gone to before that I know you and I are very much on the same wavelength about, which is the idea that we can't do something for somebody, we can do it in cooperation with them.
Yes.
He's actually stating here in a fairly clear way, well, you can do it regardless of what they're thinking. It's outside of their conscious mind. And I want to bring a couple of ideas in that I think help me to understand what Neville's saying here. I could easily jump into the idea that Neville is saying, yes, you really can make things happen in other people. I could buy into that. But I don't buy into that completely because I don't think that's what Neville's saying. And because of what I know about what Abraham teaches and what our other teachers have also taught us. This is where I like to remind myself that we do not live in a black and white universe. We live in a gray universe. Actually, we live in a colorful universe. And colors are not black and white. They're colorful. We don't live in a soup where everything comes out perfectly this way or perfectly that way. It's always a mixture. And so even when we're in an ambivalent mindset, putting out ambivalent signals, we're getting ambivalency back. We're getting a variety of different results coming back.
Yes.
It's a mixture. It's a soup that's coming back. Now, what we as students, especially when the first time we're reading something like this, we want to believe, yes, I can heal my sick father who has cancer, even though he doesn't believe in this stuff. Mm-hmm. And is that possible? Yes, that's possible. Is it going to happen? Not necessarily. Why? Because it's a soup. It is not a simple black and white formula.
And because of the corresponding vibration.
Yes.
Right? And so the other party's disbelief or limiting beliefs or beliefs are also going to play into it. Now, see, when I read this, you know what I think right away. It's like,
yes.
Someone saying I can get my ex back.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yes. Right.
Even though they don't want anything to do with me.
Right. Yes.
That happens. I don't know why, but there are people who want their ex back. Even though
a lot of people. They post often on Facebook. That's
always my question is that why do you want to be with someone who doesn't want to be with you? And so, one of my other close friends, Jeanette Ma, she wrote a blog post about this one time because she gets asked the same question, and she called it, that's the voodoo I don't do, right? It's like, I don't, can you work some magic and get my ex back? But what I see here, what I think logically is that Neville is talking about a vibration that's so pure and so confident. And I think if you could obtain that you probably could have the result.
Yes.
But for the most part, people don't get quite there, and they are still partially telling the story that their ex doesn't talk to them and doesn't want them back. So it's probably not going to happen, because for them to conjure up, if you will, that mental conversation with the ex where there is not the slightest bit of doubt, that's probably not going to happen. They do have the slightest bit of doubt. That's why they call me and Jeanette and say, can you help us with this? And we say, no. But I think that it's that level of practice and that level of controlled reverie that Neville's talking about that can do wondrous things. But like you said, we don't live in a black and white world. We live in a world that has many, many shades. And we also have to deal with, the idea that there are almost 8 billion other people on the planet, and they all have vibrations too. And all of our vibrations affect each other.
They do.
So there's that, right?
I'm reminded of the story of Dr. Wayne Dyer, who was a teacher of law of attraction, among other things. And before he died, he did a conversation with Abraham. He sat across from Esther Hicks, and Esther channeled Abraham, and they had this conversation. If you want to think of it as a duel, Abraham won in the first round. I mean, it was a first round knockout. That's how
I laughed out loud watching that interview quite a few times.
You have, okay, you know which one I'm talking about.
Yes.
Well, one of the things he talked about in that interview was how he had connected with this gentleman from South America, I can't remember what his name, to help him cure him of his cancer.
Yes.
And he went and visited this person. You could actually look this guy up. I actually looked him up online, and he has what you might expect, kind of a mixed reputation. The skeptics say, oh, it's all a bunch of hooey. He's a rip-off artist. And the adherents say, oh, yeah, no, he's the real deal, and so forth. Anyway, Dr. Dyer went to see him and was cured of his cancer. Mm-hmm. And he reported being cured. His doctors reported that well, they wouldn't say cured. They'd say in remission, but he was in remission and so forth. And he attributed it to that situation. Well, Abraham, of course, talked about how, well, actually you did it through your mind and did his whole thing, or did their whole thing rather. But to me, the most important point where we're talking about right here is he died shortly afterward of cancer. Now, I don't doubt for a second that he was cured of cancer, but the cancer came back. Mm-hmm. He was cured and it came back. It can be both.
Yeah.
It isn't like if you cure him of cancer, then it's over and he lives forever. It can be that. I'm not saying it can't be. Yeah. I'm just saying that's not necessarily the result. Why? For the reason we're talking about. There are multiple points of attraction going on here.
Right.
So, and I think that's what Neville is recognizing too. He's giving a very clear image of, okay, here's how you really do help somebody else. Got to be clear of mind and so forth. And if you are, to the best possible degree, you will get the result you're looking for. But, and this is the key but, don't expect it to always be that's where it stays, because we live in a fluid environment where things continue to change.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, this was a good chapter.
Very good. I loved it. And I love the fact that we actually got through more than a single chapter. We got through a chapter and a half. That was pretty good. Considering how the book, The Prayer and the Art of Believing, has gone for us. This one's kind of returned us to the roots of discussion. So like, okay, here's what's really going on. So good stuff. Anyway, thank you for leading us through this as usual. Your leadership is wonderful. So thank you so much. Tell people how to reach Cindy Chavez too before we go.
You can find me online, cindychavez.com. It's CINDIECHAVEZ.com. There's a contact form on my website. I would love to hear from you.
Oh, yeah, it's wonderful whenever we hear from one of our listeners or more than one of our listeners. So thank you for that. Thank you to our live stream listeners, and for Jeffrey in particular. Jeffrey was just typing up a storm sharing all this stuff.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
So thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you to our podcast listeners as well. And we will see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.